Hello YouTube! Welcome to Dragon's Dojo Gaming once again. I am Andrew Sellers. As you all know, am Andrew Sellers. And I am showing off my premium Vanquisher deck that I've used at the KingSlayer Games event on Sunday. I, as quite a bit of you know, have made it 16th place with Overlord over at the standard event they held last weekend on Saturday. I have posted the profile days ago, and for those of you that haven't seen it yet, feel free to go check it out and like and subscribe. And now I'm about to bring you all my Vanquisher deck profile for premium. I unfortunately didn't top at the event, but I still had a lot of fun. So first up, for my starter, I have Spark Kid Draco Kid, the shiny one of the best boys. Next up, one of the Overtrigger 2-draw PGs. And I also run nine critical triggers. Overtriggers in there for obvious reasons. I have two copies of the Grade 1 Sentinel in my deck. I will get to her later. But as you see in my Grade 0 lineup, I've got 2 copies of the Draw PG. I've got a playset of Palowina, 4 copies of the Stride Fodder Draco Kid, and 1 copy of Spark Edge. I run 1 copy of a V-Crit because 1, I like the extra crit power in this deck, and 2, because Spark Edge, best V Narukami trigger. He's got my favorite artwork of all the V Narukami triggers. Now for Grade 1s. First up, 2 copies of Anastasia. Her skill is Thunderstrike 4. For those of you who don't know, Thunderstrike is a skill that is active when your opponent's bind zone has 4 or more cards. When she retires from the Guardian Circle, I draw a card. I really like her in the deck because she's an extra Grade 1, and if the opponent has at least 4 binded cards, I get to draw a card. She's nice. Next up, 2 copies of Rising Phoenix. I play him in the deck because he's a free drop zone superior caller and gets +3 after being superior called. And 2's all you really need in the deck. Next up, 4 copies of the best Grade 1s in the deck, Chain Bolt and Mighty Bolt. Chain Bolt's in here because when he's ridden upon, you check the top 7 for any Vanquisher unit, and if he is bound from hand during your turn, you get to superior call it. One of the nice parts about Chain Bolt is that if you call it before getting the chance to superior ride Vanquisher Fulbronto, you can superior ride Fulbronto when you bind it from your hand, and give Chain Bolt plus 10,000 power once Fulbronto hits the board, so that he'll be swinging for 23k before trigger checks. Mighty Bolt's there because he's an additional Grade 3 searcher and gets +5 when any player's unit is bound, whether it be from the rear guard, the drop zone, or from hand. Like, if it's bound, period, Mighty Bolt gets +5,000. He's easily one of the best Grade 3 searchers in the game. Now for Grade 2s. First up, 4 copy of Rock Climb Dragoon. Rock Climb's really good in the deck because after he attacks, you get to draw a card. You get to retire him, draw a card, then choose a unit from your hand and bind it. He's really good because he gives you more hand advantage, and he helps you get to Volbranto faster. Definitely the best grade 2 in the deck in my opinion. Next up, 4 copies of Chatara. Chatara is really good because if you call him from your hand, if you bind him from hand during your turn, you get to superior call him. He gets plus 10k. And if you've got Vanquisher or Volbranto on your board, he gets an additional plus 10k, making him 33 on his own before triggers, and even higher if you've got a unit boosting him. And if his attack hits, you get to Soul Blast 1, draw a card, and then choose one of your opponent's rear guards and bind it. Chatara is a really good powerhouse draw extender. Next up, 2 copies of Cho-Oh. Cho-Oh's good because he snipes rear guards and he restands after your Vanguard attacks if your opponent has no rear guards in their front row. And if you were to stride into him while your Vanguard is Exterminate Dragon, and if your opponent has a bunch of open front row rear guard circles, you can use his skill to give Cho-Oh a huge power bonus before it gets to attack either time. Now for the grade 3s. First up, for Blitz Knuckle Dragon, the heal trigger of the deck. He's a really good early game guarder, and he's also there for G Guardians. Now, onto the boss unit onto the main unit of the deck, Dragonic Vanquisher. Other than Vermilion, Vanquisher is my boy. He's amazing because for as long as he's on your board, and if you've bound, and if 3 or more rear guards have been, 3 or more units have been bound from anywhere, he gets plus 10k. Your whole board gets plus 10k for the rest of the user's turn. And without him, the deck wouldn't be without this unit specifically, the deck just wouldn't function. Next up, 4 copies of Volbranto. I play Volbranto at 4 in the deck because he's your best grade 3 besides Vanquisher, and you're gonna want to see him in hand for more attacks and whatnot. You're basically gonna want him in hand with Jaggy Shot or Rock Climb on your board so that you can superior ride him. Next up, 3 copies of Jaggy Shot Dragoon. You could also play him at 4, but I personally prefer to play him at 3 in my build. Jaggy Shot's really good because you can use him to not only get to Volbranto, but you can also use him to call units like Chain Bolt and Chichara. Like, Jaggy Shot's easily one of the best cards in the deck. And now for the G-Zone. 2 copies of one of the strongest units in the deck. Stun vs. Dragon. Definitely the best stride unit in this deck. Stun vs. is an amazing card because he snipes your opponent's rear guards, snipes them from drop, and even snipes cards from your opponent's hand for every 4 cards they have bound, and also lets you draw a card for every 4 bound cards your opponent has. Like, if I were to somehow manage to get to where my opponent has 12 bound cards in zone, I could draw 3. Or if 16, I could draw 4. I see most builds play him at 3, but I honestly prefer to play him at 2 in my build because I feel like playing him at any higher than 2 makes you deck out faster. And I just prefer to play him at 2 because of the decking out. But you could theoretically play him at 3. Stunverse is still undeniably the best grade 4 in the Stride. Grade 4, yeah. And I think because of how busted Stunverse is, and after seeing how busted Vanquisher is as a deck because of Stunverse, I undoubtedly think that Stunverse will get hit. Next up, 4 copies of Exterminate Dragon. He's only needed at 2 or 3, but I play him at 4 because even though you don't need him at 4, I would naturally go into 2 of it and just use the other 2 as flip fodder for Stunverse. Biggest reason I play him at 4. But Exterminate's definitely one of the strongest units in the deck. His skill says when he is placed on Vanguard, you Soul Blast 1, draw a card for every open rear guard in your opponent's front row. And his other skill says, act, Counterblast 1, your whole front row gets plus 10,000 for the rest of the turn. Like if you had Cho-Oh on board, you could give power to Cho-Oh, swing for a big number with Cho-Oh, and then after attacking with Exterminate Dragon, you can restand your Cho-Oh, and then swing with Rock Climber Jaggy Shot next, and then use one of their skills to snipe your opponent's rear guards if they have any, and if you have Fulbronto in your hand, you can bind him from hand, Superior Ride Fulbronto, and then Cho-Oh will get 10,000 more power, which will make it harder for the opponent to stop Cho-Oh's attacks. Unless they're playing Kagero and have Denial Griffin in the deck. Then they could just kill Cho-Oh before it even gets the chance to restand. Next up, 2 V-Buster. V-Buster's a nice card in the deck because its skill says Thunderstrike 7, all of your front row units get plus 5,000 power, and V-Buster gets plus 1 crit and an extra drive, meaning when he attacks, he becomes 27k with quad drive and 2 critical. And his other skill says Soul Blast 1, flip another copy of V-Buster from your G-Zone face up. Your opponent chooses 1 card from each of his or her rear guards in drop zone and binds them face up. If the number of rear guards you control is more than your opponent's, choose 3 of your units and give them plus 3,000 power. He's a good power extender, and he's good for attack pressure. Next up, 1 copy of your 5 damage finisher, VMAX. Basically, his skill is GB3, Counterblast 2. If your opponent's he attacks the opponent's entire front row, which is cool and all, but the best part of the card is if your opponent is at 5. If your opponent's at 5 damage while you're using this skill, you can inflict a damage to them, and if they're at 5 damage, and unless they end up pulling a heal or an overtrigger, you win the game. He's a really nice card. Now for the GB8. Closer Dragon. This dude is insane. I ended up making a big misplay that could have guaranteed me a victory against Chaos Breaker. So this guy says, when this unit's placed on Vanguard, retire all rear guards of all fighters, bind all of the cards in your opponent's drop zone face up, and until the end of this turn, this unit gets continuous. All your units get plus 2,000 for each card in all players' bind zones. On this play I made with him was the opponent was at 5 damage. They used all their heal triggers. I had the opportunity to I drew for turn. I only had 1 card left in deck. I could have stridden into him, but I was an idiot and I didn't realize I could have stridden into him. Oh, and he also didn't have a lot of cards and the opponent I fought against didn't have a lot of cards in his hand. So if I had stridden into him, he also told me he didn't have much guarding power, so if I were to have stridden into him and called a board of rear guards, it would have just taken me 1 attack. He would have been forced to take a damage, and the game would have been over right there. Wish I realized that sooner, but realizing that later on helped me remember to not forget it the next time I get the opportunity to. Now for the G-Guardians. 4 copies of Counteract Dragon. This guy is so free. He says when it's placed on G-Guardian, your opponent chooses 2 of their front row rear guards and binds them. If they did not bind 2 cards until the end of that 2 units, and until the end of the battle, Counteract gets plus 10,000, and if they didn't bind any cards, it gets an additional plus 10. Meaning, they have the option to choose whether they can bind rear guards or not. If they choose to bind 2 units, it gets no shield. If they choose to bind 1 unit, he gets plus 10,000 power alone. However, if they choose to bind 0 rear guards, he gets plus 20,000 shield, which is absolutely amazing. I see no reason not to play Counteract at 4 in the deck. And for the last 2 G-Guardians, Impede Dragon and Bulwark Dragon. Impede, in my opinion, is the better card, and Bulwark is just there for fodder, but I will explain their skills for those of you that like to know. That don't know yet. Impede says Generation Break 1, choose a face down G-Guardian from your G-Zone and flip it face up. Your opponent chooses 1 of his or her rear guards and binds it face up. If the number of rear guards they have, then the opponent is 2 or more. They choose 1 of their rear guards and retire it. Usually, I choose to go into him whenever my opponent only has 1 rear guard, because I can use him to... Because if I were to go into him while my opponent only has 1 rear guard, I could Denial Griffin that rear guard and bind it after Denial Griffining it. Bulwark Dragon's really just there for strike as fodder for Impede Dragon, but his other skill says Thunder Strike 3. If your opponent has 3 or more cards in their bind zone, he gets plus 10,000 shield. And if he's retired from rear guard, for every 4 rear guards in your opponent's bind zone, the opponent chooses 1 rested rear guard in their front row and retire it. Like I said, he's really just there as fodder for Impede Dragon. Whole reason I use him. That and because he looks cool. Well, everybody, I hope you all enjoyed my deck profile. I also really hope that it'll help those that haven't built Vanquisher that are interested in building it. And despite that I didn't top with this deck, I still overall had a lot of fun playing the deck in the event. Like, overall, I don't care about winning or losing. I'm just happy to get the chance to play the game. Well, everybody, I wish you all a good night, and I also wish you all a happy 4th of July tomorrow. Peace out, yo!